An issue that will likely surface in the 2014 legislative session is the balance of law enforcement using technology to monitor people, along with the individual's right to privacy. Here to talk about his proposal, we have Senator Branden Peterson. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Senator, the question is, what standards should be in place when law enforcement utilizes the most modern surveillance technology? So before I ask you what you think that answer should be, I want to ask you if you believe the tracking of individuals is out of control at this point.
Well, I think it is, and I think that the statutes that we have in place aren't up to speed with the technological capabilities that we have. 30 years ago, you would have never envisioned that the government could track your movement 24 hours a day using your cell phone, keep a log of every single person that you speak to on the phone. Even credit card transactions, which is separate from this issue, are now being collected as part of mass surveillance. And so I think that people are now revisiting the issue of privacy in light of those technological capabilities.
And so what do you think the answer to the question is?
Well, I think when you're talking about the issue of searching people's papers, if you will, as it's described in the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, I think a lot of people would also include the number of contacts that you are making, whereas that used to be something that law enforcement would have to request via a warrant or a subpoena of the phone company, is now something they can do without ever contacting a third party. And so I think that people, in particular, if they're individually being targeted by law enforcement, I think there should be a search warrant requirement, for example, in place.
The House Civil Law Committee just had a hearing on this issue, and Catherine Crump, an ACLU attorney, stated during her testimony that as you craft legislation, it's important to look ahead to technologies of tomorrow and just not what's available now. So what kind of challenges does this present as you move forward?
Well, I think the key is not enumerating a particular piece of technology. And so what we're thinking of doing is, rather than saying it's with the cellular exploitative device, which is, or Kingfish as it's commonly referred to, is saying that any time that you specifically surveil an individual for purposes of an investigation, outside of an emergency situation where someone's life is at risk, that situation should require a search warrant. And so that way, if you lay out and enumerate the criteria, that would be, surveillance of an individual for a specific crime, recording location, recording phone calls, that should require a search warrant. And so then it doesn't really matter what the kind of technology is, right? Whether it's Kingfish or something down the road that is singling in an individual for ongoing surveillance, that should be sort of a timeless statute. It should apply in all situations regardless of what the capabilities are.
And one of the concerns brought up during this committee is how long data should be able to be kept by law enforcement. So how long do you think is a reasonable amount of time?
Well, I think if you go about the right channels and you get a search warrant from a judge, they should be able to hold that information for as long as that investigation is going on. But in cases of individuals who haven't reached the standard of search warrant, then that information shouldn't be held at all, in my opinion, until they reach that threshold of court-approved search warrant. So,
Senator, you intend to move forward with legislation on this issue. Are you talking with law enforcement agencies? Are they on board at all, or is this the legislature taking its own path at this point?
We have monitored the communication back and forth with some of the legislators who have written the BCA, Hennepin County in particular. I saw the most recent letter in response from DPS. I intend to set up meetings with these entities prior to a committee hearing and hearing their response. So far, it's been fairly cold in terms of disclosing all of the information. Some things they're citing as security information or investigative tactics, which has sort of been used as a catch-all to prevent some transparency into some of those issues. So yes, the short answer is yes, we plan to work with them, but it won't be a prerequisite necessarily that they approve of everything we're putting forward.
Should this be a federal issue?
Well, I think it is a federal issue. I mean,
should this be a federal law? Where does the state really fit in with something like this?
Well, I mean, I think I try to control what I can control here, and as a state legislator, I'm primarily concerned about those things that are affecting Minnesotans and the people in my district. I think there's some merit to a federal statute or a federal conversation about this issue, and I think as more sunlight is shown on the NSA issue in particular, and mass surveillance issues all around, I think you'll see conversations at every level of government. And we've even seen conversations at city and county government about other means of surveillance, be it drones or what have you.
Okay, Senator, I want to switch gears right now and look ahead to what has been called the Safe and Supportive Schools Act. You sit on the Senate Education Finance Committee.
Yeah.
You oppose this measure. Why?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, let me just say everybody opposes bullying. And I believe, having served on both the Policy and the Finance Committee, that there is strong support for enhancing the state statute around bullying, both with Republicans and Democrats. I think the issue here is, as has been pointed out by the School Boards Association and others, is number one, it's a significant and costly mandate. Number two, it goes about a lengthy list of requirements, including volunteer training, language like real and perceived imbalances of power, and that has to be judged by administrators in schools. And so I think there's a lot of concern around exactly how that will be enforced and whether that will become sort of an arbitrary standard from district to district because of sort of the burden of all of those requirements around bullying. But everybody is opposed to bullying. It's just a matter of whether we can come to an agreement. And like I said, I'm confident that the Republican caucuses would support a bullying bill that would enhance the state language, but to this point, we haven't been able to get there.
So what would you like to see in a piece of legislation that you could support?
Well, I think right now the state statute is primarily just a directive to districts that says you need to have a policy about bullying. I think that we could update the statute as it relates to cyberbullying, for example. A lot of those issues were not contemplated when that original language was put into statute, and the idea now that some kids are tormented 24 hours a day using their mobile devices, I think is abhorrent and should be dealt with. And so I think that's one issue. I think that we can, rather than saying specifically, or not specifically that you need to have a set of policies, that we can enumerate some maybe harsher penalties for students at the district level. So I think there are, like I said, there is an appetite to do something around this issue, not only to bring the statute up to sort of where technology is today with cyberbullying, but also making sure that every district has sort of a minimum threshold of accountability for students and teachers.
If it's found that there is indeed a price tag for schools to try to implement this policy, a policy change, if there is one passed by the legislature, would you support increasing funding to help pay for that?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to point out that in the last biennium there was an incremental $500 million dedicated to public education. So I would consider a safe environment a sort of core function of school districts, and so that should be part of what they're doing every day. So part of that $500 million should be going to that anyways. I'm sure that everybody agrees that making sure that kids aren't harassed and that they're not being picked on and that they're safe is a core function, and that it shouldn't necessarily be its own dedicated funding stream for that issue. And we do, as you probably know, already have what's called the Safe Schools Levy in each district that allows districts to raise revenue just for that sort of issue.
Okay, Senator Peterson, we are out of time. Thank you for talking about both of these issues with us, though. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.